I came home from a 3-week job in Tulsa, expecting to find my wife in the garden. That was the picture I'd been carrying around in my head the whole drive back across 2 states, late September, the kind of afternoon where the light goes gold around 4 o'clock, and Eleanor would be out there in her old straw hat, pulling up the last of the tomato vines. I'd pull into the driveway and honk twice the way I always did, and she'd straighten up slow because of her hip, and she'd wave with that dirty garden glove on, and I'd be home. That's not what happened. The driveway was empty. The garden looked like nobody had touched it in weeks. There were tomatoes on the ground, split open and rotting, and the basil my wife babied like a third child had bolted and gone to seed. I sat in the truck for maybe a full minute just looking at it. Eleanor would never let her garden go like that. Not for any reason. That woman would crawl out there on a broken hip if she had to. I went inside calling her name, and the house had a smell to it that I can't quite describe even now. Not bad exactly. Just wrong. Like nobody had opened a window in a long time. Like the air had been sitting still. I found her in the back bedroom. The one we used to call the sewing room before her mother got sick, and we turned it into a hospice room, and then back into a sewing room after the funeral. She was sitting on the edge of the daybed in there, and she had her hands folded in her lap, and she was crying without making any sound at all. Just tears running down her face into her collar. She was wearing a sweatshirt I didn't recognize. Gray. Too big for her. Her hair wasn't brushed. I'm 68 years old. I've seen my wife cry maybe 5 times in 41 years of marriage, when her father died, when we lost the baby in 79, when the doctor told us about the lump that turned out to be benign. A couple of times at movies, but those don't really count. My wife is not a crier. My wife is the kind of woman who cried once at her own mother's funeral and then went home and made a casserole for everybody who showed up at the house. So when I walked in and saw her sitting there silent with her face wet, my stomach dropped right through the floor. I said her name. She didn't look up. I went and knelt down in front of her, which my knees did not appreciate, and I took her hands, and her hands were ice cold. The house wasn't cold. Her hands were cold the way a person's hands get when they haven't moved in a long time, when the blood isn't going where it should. "Honey," I said. "Honey, what happened? Tell me what happened." She shook her head. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't look at me. She just kept shaking her head. No, like she was answering some question I hadn't asked. I sat with her for I don't know how long. An hour, maybe. The light moved across the floor and started to fade, and I just held her hands and tried to warm them up, and I waited, because I've been married to this woman since 1983, and I know her, and I knew that if I pushed her, she'd close up tighter, and if I waited, she'd come out eventually. She finally said, in a voice I didn't recognize, "I want to go to bed." It was 4 in the afternoon. I helped her up. She moved like a much older woman than she was. Eleanor's only 65, and she's strong. She's always been strong. She walks 2 miles every morning, and she can still hoist a 50-pound bag of mulch onto a wheelbarrow. But she walked down that hallway like somebody who'd been beaten. I don't know how else to put it. Like a person who'd been broken down piece by piece. I got her into our bed, and she curled up on her side facing the wall, and she didn't say another word. I sat in the chair by the window, and I watched her until I was sure she was asleep. And then I went out into the kitchen, and I started looking around. The first thing I noticed was the weight thing. There was a bathroom scale by the back door, which was odd, because Eleanor kept her scale in the master bathroom upstairs. I stepped on it just out of curiosity, because I'd been in a truck eating gas station food for 3 weeks, and I figured I'd put on 5 pounds. The scale read what it should have, so somebody had been using it. I picked it up and saw there was a notepad underneath it. Eleanor's handwriting. A list of dates and numbers going back about 2.5 weeks. The first number was 141. The last number, from 2 days ago, was 128. My wife had lost 13 pounds in less than 3 weeks. I stood there in the kitchen holding that little notepad, and my hands started to shake. I'm not a man who shakes. I worked 36 years as a lineman for the electric company, climbing poles in ice storms, and my hands have been steady through things you wouldn't believe. They were not steady right then. I went to the refrigerator. There was almost nothing in it. A half-empty carton of milk that smelled bad when I opened it. Some yogurt cups. 3 of them. All unopened. All expired. A jar of pickles. That was it. The freezer had a couple of things in it, but nothing that looked recent. This is a woman who keeps a stocked kitchen the way some people keep a clean garage. There's always soup. There's always bread in the bread box. There's always something thawing for dinner. Eleanor cooks the way her mother cooked, and her grandmother before her, like feeding people is a sacrament. I went and looked in the trash. The trash had been emptied recently, but in the bin liner there were a few wadded-up tissues and one styrofoam container from the diner over on Route 9. The container had a name written on the lid in Sharpie. It wasn't Eleanor's name, it was Marisol. Marisol is my daughter-in-law. She's been married to my son Daniel for 9 years. She's 36 years old, and she works at a real estate office in town, and she has always been, I'll be honest, a person I had complicated feelings about. She talked too much. She bought my wife expensive gifts she didn't ask for, and then made comments later about how generous she'd been. She had opinions about how Daniel should spend his money, and how we should live our lives. Opinions she expressed in a sweet little voice that made you feel like a jerk for disagreeing. But she'd been the one who volunteered to look in on Eleanor while I was gone. Eleanor had her hip surgery in July. She was off the walker by August, but she still wasn't 100%. When the Tulsa job came up, I almost turned it down, but Eleanor said go. The money's good. I'm fine. I can drive. I can cook. I'm fine. And then Marisol called me 2 days before I left and said in that sweet voice, "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll come by every day. I'll do the grocery run. I'll keep her company. You go make that money. Family takes care of family." I remember thanking her. I remember thanking her. I remember being grateful. I stood in my kitchen looking at that styrofoam container with my daughter-in-law's name on it, and something inside my chest started turning slowly, the way an old engine turns over before it catches fire. I went out to the garage. I'd put a security camera up there about 4 years ago after a string of break-ins on our road. It was one of those wireless deals that streamed to an app on my phone. I'd honestly forgotten about it. I hadn't checked it in months because nothing ever happened. I sat in my truck in the dark garage and I opened the app. The camera was motion activated. There were hundreds of clips. Hundreds. Most of them were a few seconds. Deer in the driveway, a stray cat, the mailman. But I started scrolling back through the dates, looking for the days I'd been gone. The first clip I watched was from my second day in Tulsa. It showed Marisol's blue Honda pulling into the driveway at around 11 in the morning. She got out carrying a grocery bag and went inside. About 40 minutes later, she came back out, got in her car, and drove away. The grocery bag came out with her, but it looked emptier. I thought, okay, that's not strange. Maybe Eleanor only needed a few things? The next clip from that day was at 5 in the afternoon. Marisol, again, no grocery bag this time. She was inside for 2 hours. When she came out, she was on her phone, laughing about something. I started watching every clip. Every single one. I sat in that truck in the dark for I don't know how long. My back was killing me. I didn't move. What I saw, over the course of those 3 weeks, broke something in me that I'm not sure has gone back together yet. Marisol came every day, sometimes twice. She'd bring a small grocery bag in and a different, smaller bag out. She always parked her car so it blocked the view through the front window from the road. She started showing up at strange hours, 10 at night, 6 in the morning. The clips didn't show me what was happening inside the house. But they showed me a pattern. They showed me a person who was there constantly, who was managing access, who was making sure nobody else could just drop by. There was one clip that stopped me cold. It was from about a week into my trip. Our neighbor from across the street, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Biss, Hennings, walked up our front path with a covered dish. She rang the bell. Marisol came to the door. They talked for maybe 2 minutes. Marisol's body language was all wrong, blocking the doorway, smiling in that tight way people smile when they're trying to get rid of you. Mrs. Knight, Hennings handed over the dish and walked away looking confused. The next morning at 6 a.m., the camera caught Marisol carrying a covered dish out to her car. The same covered dish I'd bet money. Mrs. Hennings's casserole. She'd taken it home with her. I watched my own driveway for 3 weeks of footage. I watched my daughter-in-law isolate my wife from every other human being on the planet. I went back into the house. Eleanor was still asleep. I stood at the foot of the bed, and I looked at my wife of 41 years. This woman who had given me a son and built me a life. And I made myself a promise. I was going to find out exactly what had happened in this house. And then I was going to do something about it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a pot of coffee and I started going for the mail. There was a stack of it Eleanor had put in the wooden bowl by the door, the way she always did. Bills and ads in the church newsletter. But underneath those, there were a few things that didn't make sense. There was a letter from the bank, addressed to both of us, confirming the addition of an authorized signer on our checking account, dated 2 weeks ago. The authorized signer was Marisol. I sat there reading that letter 4 or 5 times. I don't bank online. I'm an old man. I write checks. I keep a paper register. I'd balance it once a month. I had not added anyone to my checking account. Eleanor had not, in any conversation we'd ever had, mentioned adding anyone to our checking account, and Marisol's name didn't belong on any piece of paper related to our money under any circumstance. I kept going through the mail. There was an unopened envelope from our financial advisor, the man who handled our retirement accounts. I tore it open. It was a confirmation of a withdrawal request, $22,000 from our IRA, pending Eleanor's signature, which had been received and processed. I felt my face get hot. I felt my hands start to shake again. There was a similar letter from the credit union. A line of credit had been opened against the equity in our house, $40,000. I pushed back from the table and I had to walk around the kitchen for a few minutes because I thought I was going to be sick. I made myself drink a glass of water. I made myself sit back down. In the back of the bowl, underneath everything else, was a folded up piece of yellow legal paper. Eleanor's handwriting, but shaky. Not the smooth school teacher penmanship I was used to. It was a list of things she had given Marisol or signed over to her in the last 3 weeks. The last item on the list was the deed to the house. Underneath it all, in tiny shaky letters, my wife had written, "I am so sorry." I didn't know how to stop her. I put my head down on that kitchen table, and I cried. Not for long, but I cried like a man who has just understood something he doesn't want to understand. Eleanor was scared. My wife was scared in her own house, of a person we had welcomed into our family. And she had been scared for weeks, and she had been alone with it. When I finally got up, I had stopped shaking. I want you to understand that. The shaking was over. What replaced it was something colder and steadier than I have felt in a long time. I am not a violent man. I have never raised a hand to anyone in my life outside of a couple of fistfights when I was 19 years old. But sitting in that kitchen at 3 in the morning, I understood for the first time in my life why some men do. I did not do that. I want to be clear about that. I did not do that. What I did was, I made a list of my own. The first thing on the list was a man named Carlton Pruitt, who'd been our family lawyer for about 25 years. I would call him at 8 a.m. sharp. The second thing was the bank. I'd be there when the doors opened. The third thing was a sheriff's deputy. I knew a woman named Reyes who ran the elder fraud unit out of the county sheriff's office. Eleanor's bridge group had her come and give a talk a couple of years ago about exactly this kind of situation. I still had her card. The fourth thing was harder. The fourth thing was figuring out what to do about my son. Daniel is 42 years old. He's our only child. I love that boy like air. He'd been on a hunting trip up in Wisconsin for the last week of my Tulsa job, completely off the grid, no cell service. He was due back in 2 days. He had no idea any of this was happening. I had to believe that. I had to believe my son was not part of this. The Marisol was his wife, and my son had been married to her for 9 years, and he was not stupid. And the question of how much he knew, or how much he had let himself not know, was a question I was going to have to ask him to his face. I waited until 5 a.m. Then I started cooking. I don't cook much. Eleanor's the cook, but I can make breakfast. I made bacon and scrambled eggs and toast and a fresh pot of coffee, and I cut up a grapefruit, because Eleanor likes grapefruit in the morning, and I made it the way she likes it, with a little sugar on top. I brought it in to her on a tray. She woke up slowly. She looked at me, and then she looked at the tray, and then she started to cry again. Not the silent kind from yesterday. Big, shoulder-shaking sobs, the kind you cry when you've been holding something in for a long time. I set the tray down. I sat on the edge of the bed. I held her. When she could finally talk, she said, "I didn't want to tell you. I thought I could handle it." "I know," I said. "I know you did." She said if I told you, you would have a heart attack. She said you have a bad heart, and the stress would kill you, and then she'd be the one taking care of me, all alone. She said it would just be me and her. Forever. I closed my eyes. I do not have a bad heart. My heart is the one thing about me that hasn't given out yet. But Marisol had figured out what scared my wife the most, which was being a burden, which was being the cause of something happening to me. And she had used it. She told me you weren't going to come back from Tulsa, Eleanor said. She told me you'd met someone there. She had pictures on her phone, a woman. She said you were going to leave me and I'd have nobody. None of that is true, I said. Look at me. Look at me. None of that is true. I know, she said. I know in my head. But I was so tired and she just kept saying it and I started to wonder. We sat there for a long time. She ate a piece of toast. Then another. Then she had some eggs. I watched her eat and I kept my face calm, and inside me there was a thing happening that I'm not going to try to describe. She made me sign things, Eleanor said. She'd come in the middle of the night with papers. She'd say it was for my own good. She'd say it was so I wouldn't lose the house. She said you'd run up debts in Tulsa, and she was protecting us. I know, I said. I found the papers. We're going to fix it. Can we fix it? We are going to fix it, I said. I promise you we are going to fix it. I want you to do something for me today. I want you to stay in this bed and rest. I'm going to lock all the doors, and I'm going to put the chain on. If she comes by, you do not answer that door. You do not pick up that phone. You let me handle every part of this. Can you do that? She nodded. One more thing, I said, and I'm sorry to ask, but I need to know everything she said to you. Everything she did. I need you to write it down, or tell me, or both. Because we are going to need it. Do you understand? I understand. I kissed her forehead. I went and locked every door in the house. I put the chain on the front door, and I dropped a piece of 2x4 into the slider track on the back. I checked all the windows. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with the laptop my son had bought me 3 Christmases ago that I had barely used, and I figured out how to download every single one of those security camera clips onto a thumb drive. It took me most of the morning. I'm not fast at that kind of thing, but I got it done. At 8 a.m., I called Carlton Pruitt's office. His secretary picked up and I said, "This is an emergency. I need to see Carlton today." And she heard something in my voice, and she said, "Come in at 10. I called Deputy Reyes. I left a message. I drove to the bank. The branch manager was a woman named Tatum I'd known for 15 years. I sat down across from her desk and I laid out the letter about the authorized signer, and I said, "I did not authorize this. My wife was coerced into authorizing this. I am freezing this account today, and I am opening a new one, and I want every transaction that has occurred on this account in the last 30 days printed out and put in front of me." Tatum looked at me for a long minute. Then she said, "Sir, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking because I have to ask, not because I doubt you. Has someone been taking advantage of your wife? Yes. Family member? Yes. She nodded once. Sit tight, she said. She came back 20 minutes later with a folder thick as a phone book. I sat in that bank for 2 hours going through every transaction. There were withdrawals from ATMs I'd never used. There were checks made out to cash. There were transfers to an account that turned out to be Marisol's personal account. There was a withdrawal of $9,000 in one day, just under the federal reporting threshold, which told me everything I needed to know about whether this was something Marisol had done before. By the time I left the bank, I had the account frozen. A new account opened in my name only, a written record of every transaction, and Tatum's word that she would call the bank's fraud department herself. I went to Carlton's office. I told him everything. I gave him the thumb drive of camera footage and the legal pad list and the bank records. He listened the way he always listens, with his chin resting on his hand and his eyes closed. When I was done, he opened his eyes and he said, Hollis, this is criminal. This is not just a family dispute. This is multiple felonies. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it carefully. Do you want to handle this within the family, or do you want this woman to face the legal consequences of what she has done? I thought about Daniel. I thought about my grandchildren, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, who Marisol had not allowed to come visit Eleanor in 3 weeks, citing a stomach bug that did not exist. I thought about my wife in that bed at 4 in the afternoon, unable to speak. I want her to face every consequence the law allows, I said. Then we do it right, Carlton said. We do not tip her off. We do not confront her. We do not let her have the chance to destroy evidence or cook up a story. You go home. You keep your wife safe. You do not answer her calls. Let me do my job. By Friday, I will have every single document she made your wife sign declared null and void on the basis of duress and elder abuse. By Friday, Deputy Reyes will have a warrant. Can you sit on this for 48 hours? I can sit on it for as long as it takes, I said. I drove home. I checked on Eleanor. She was up, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking tea. The color was back in her face, just a little. She had a yellow notepad in front of her, and she was writing. I'm getting it all down, she said. Good. She called 4 times while you were out. You didn't answer. I didn't answer. Good. The phone rang again. We both looked at it. The caller ID said Marisol. I let it go to the machine. Marisol's sweet voice came on, saying, Hi, Mom. Just checking on you. I haven't heard from you all day. I'm a little worried. Give me a call back, honey. Love you. Eleanor closed her eyes. The next morning, Daniel came home from his hunting trip. He called from the road. Dad, I just got back in the service. I got like 15 voicemails from Marisol. What the hell is going on, she says. Mom won't take her calls. She's having a breakdown. She says you came back from Tulsa and started yelling at her. Son, I said, I need you to come to the house. Right now. Alone. Don't tell Marisol you're coming here. Tell her you're stopping at the office. Just come. He came. I'd known he would. Daniel is many things, but he's a man who shows up when his father uses that voice. I sat him down in the living room, and I told him everything. I started with walking in the door and finding Eleanor, and I went through every piece of it, and I showed him the camera footage, and I showed him the bank records, and I showed him the deed to my house, with his wife's name being added as joint owner. He didn't say anything for a long time. He sat there and he watched the footage, and his face went through about 10 different things. When I was done, he said, Dad. He couldn't get the rest of the sentence out. I know, I said. Dad, I had no idea. I swear to God, I had no idea. I swear to God, I had no idea. She told me Mom was depressed. She told me Mom was being weird with her. She told me I needed to stay out of it because Mom was embarrassed. Did she tell you about the money? What money? I looked at my son's face and I could tell he was telling the truth. I knew that face. I'd watched that face since the day it came home from the hospital. Daniel did not know. There's no money in your account that wasn't there a month ago? I asked. She didn't put anything in? No. I mean, there was. She said she got a commission. A big sale. How much? 15,000. She said it went into our savings. Son, I said, I think your wife has been stealing from your mother and putting it in your savings account and telling you it was commissions. He went into the bathroom and was sick. When he came out, he was a different man. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean his face had aged about 5 years. He sat back down on the couch and he said, "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to do nothing," I said. "I need you to go home and act normal until tomorrow. Carlton is filing the paperwork in the morning. Deputy Reyes is going to have a warrant by tomorrow afternoon. You cannot tip her off. You cannot warn her. Can you do that?" "Yes." "You sure?" "Dad, look at me. She did this to my mother. She let me think I was bringing in commission money I didn't earn. She made my kids afraid to come over here. Yes, I can do that." "All right." He stood up to go. Then he stopped. "Dad, what do I tell the kids?" I thought about that for a long minute. "You tell them Grandma got sick," I said, "and Grandma's getting better, and they're going to come spend the weekend here next weekend, and Grandma's going to teach them how to make biscuits, and after that, we'll figure it out." He hugged me. My son is 42 years old and a foot taller than me, and he hugged me like a kid. The rest you can probably guess. Carlton filed the paperwork. Deputy Reyes got the warrant. They picked Marisol up at the real estate office on a Friday afternoon, and they walked her out in handcuffs in front of every co-worker she had. Daniel filed for divorce that same day and was granted emergency custody of the kids that night, based on the criminal charges and the financial fraud. The deed to her house was nullified within a week. The IRA money was restored within 3. The bank covered everything that had gone out of the checking account because Tatum personally went to bat for us with the fraud department. The criminal case took longer, about 14 months. Marisol's lawyer tried to argue that Eleanor had given consent, that this was a family financial matter, that there had been no coercion. Then Carlton played the camera footage of our neighbor being turned away with her casserole. He played the audio Eleanor had recorded on the second week, when she figured out how to use the voice memo app on her phone, where Marisol can be heard saying, in that sweet voice, "You're not going to make it through the winter without me. You know that, right? You can't even cook anymore. He's going to come home and put you in a home and forget about you. I'm the only one who's going to take care of you. So sign the paper." Marisol got 6.5 years. She'll do at least 4. She has to pay back every penny, with interest, when she gets out, and there's a restraining order that means she can't come within 500 feet of my wife or my grandchildren for the rest of her natural life. I want to tell you a few things about the year after. Eleanor did not bounce back overnight. She had nightmares for a long time. She didn't want to be alone in the house. She started seeing a counselor at the county senior center, a young woman who specialized in elder abuse cases, and she went every week for about 10 months. She got better slowly. She gained the weight back. She started gardening again the next spring. She is still my wife. She is still the strongest person I have ever known. But she is a little different now, a little more careful, a little quicker to lock the door, and I would give anything to undo what was done to her. Daniel moved in with us for the first 3 months while the divorce went through. He slept in his old bedroom. The kids slept in the guest room. They made cookies with their grandma every Saturday morning. My son and I rebuilt the back deck together that fall, and we didn't talk much while we did it, but we worked side by side for hours every day. And somewhere in there, we were okay again. I want to say something to anyone who's listening to this. I almost didn't take that Tulsa job. Eleanor said go. The money was good. I went. I am not going to spend the rest of my life telling myself I should have stayed home. I am 68 years old and I am still working, and that is the life we built. But I want to say this. If you have parents in their 60s or 70s, even if they seem strong, even if they tell you they're fine, check on them. Not through the person who volunteered to look in on them. Directly. Drop by unannounced. Call them on the phone, the landline, not the cell. Notice if they've lost weight. Notice if their handwriting has changed. Notice if their garden is going to seed. If you are someone in your 60s or 70s and someone in your life is starting to manage your access to other people, if they're answering your phone for you, if they're turning away your friends at the door, if they're telling you things about your spouse or your children that don't sound right. Trust your gut. Find a way to make a phone call. Find a way to leave a note. Find a way. The person you love who is far away wants more than anything in the world to know. And get a camera. I know it sounds like a small thing, but a $40 camera in the eaves of a garage gave me 3 weeks of evidence that put a criminal in prison. Get one. Put it where you can see your driveway. You don't have to check it every day. You just have to have it. I want to tell you one last thing. About a month after Marisol's sentencing, I was out in the garden with Eleanor. It was early November, that cold gray daylight. We were pulling up the dead annuals. She straightened up slow, the way she always does, and she looked at me with her dirty garden glove on, and she said, "You know what I kept thinking about when I was in there with her?" "What?" "I kept thinking, he is going to come home. I kept thinking, I just have to hold on. He is going to come home, and he is going to know." I had to put my trowel down for a minute. "I came home," I said. "You did. I always will. I know." She went back to weeding. I went back to weeding. The light was gold, and the tomatoes that had survived the frost were red on the vine, and my wife was beside me, and we were home. I think about that drive home from Tulsa more than I should. 300 miles of country music and gas station coffee, and the whole time I was picturing my wife in the garden. I had no idea what I was driving toward. I had no idea that the woman I trusted with the most precious thing in my life had been walking into my house every day for 3 weeks and hollowing it out from the inside. What I learned in the year that followed is something I want to leave you with. Every single thing that happened, Eleanor, happened because somebody made a choice. Marisol made a choice when she volunteered. She made another choice when she walked in with that first set of papers. She made 100 choices over 21 days, and each one was a door she could have walked back through, and she didn't. And, on the other side of it, every good thing that came after. The bank getting our money back, the warrant, the conviction, the deed restored, my son sleeping in his old bedroom while he put his life back together. Every one of those was also a choice. Carlton picking up the phone, Tatum at the bank, deciding to fight for us. Mrs. Hennings across the street trusting her gut when something felt off about that casserole. Eleanor figuring out how to use a voice memo app at 65 years old because she was scared, but she was not done. There is no luck in any of this. There is only what people do when nobody is watching, and what they do when somebody finally is. I want to say something to the men my age who are listening. We grow up being told to provide. We grow up being told to be strong, to work hard, to bring the money home, and there is nothing wrong with any of that. But strength is not the same thing as paying attention. I almost missed what was happening to my wife, because I was 300 miles away earning a paycheck I did not actually need. Pay attention to the people you love. Notice when their handwriting changes. Notice when their garden goes to seed. Notice when their handwriting changes. Notice when their hands are cold for no reason. That is what strength looks like in our age. I want to say something about doing the right thing the right way. When I sat in that kitchen at 3 a.m. with everything spread out in front of me, every part of me wanted to drive to my son's house and put my hands on his wife. I did not do that. I called a lawyer. I called a deputy. I built a case, and because I did it that way, my wife got every dollar back, my grandchildren got their father full-time, and the woman who hurt my Eleanor is sitting in a state prison cell right now. Patience is not weakness. Sometimes patience is the most powerful thing a man can have. The last thing I want to say is this. Eleanor held on for 21 days because she believed I was coming home. Be the kind of person somebody can hold on for. That is the whole job.